The London sky hung heavy with autumn rain as Natalie Harper stepped out of the black cab onto the gleaming pavement. Her heels clicked against the wet stone as she approached the entrance of the Ashford Gallery, where warm golden light spilled through towering glass doors. Tonight was the annual charity gala for emerging artists, and Natalie had spent her last savings on the navy dress she wore, hoping this evening might change her struggling career. Inside, the gallery hummed with elegant conversation. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across white walls adorned with contemporary paintings. Women in silk gowns floated past marble sculptures, while men in tailored suits discussed art with practiced confidence. Natalie clutched her small purse, feeling like an intruder in this world of wealth and influence. She had one goal tonight: to meet someone, anyone, who might give her gallery a chance. For 3 years, she had run a tiny art space in Camden, showcasing unknown talents while barely keeping the lights on. Every rejection letter felt like another door closing, but Natalie refused to give up on the artists who believed in her. The man everyone whispered about. Near the center of the room stood a man who seemed to command attention without effort. Julian Foster. Even Natalie, who avoided celebrity gossip, knew his name. At 35, he had built a fortune in technology before turning his focus to philanthropy. His foundation supported artists across Europe, and a single endorsement from him could launch a career overnight. But Julian Foster was also the subject of endless speculation. Natalie had heard the whispers at other events, seen the magazine articles that hinted without ever stating clearly. People wondered about his private life, questioned why such a handsome, wealthy man remained perpetually single, why he never brought dates to public events. Julian stood with perfect posture, his dark suit fitting like it had been sewn onto his frame. His black hair was styled simply, and his features carried the kind of beauty that seemed almost unfair. When he spoke to the small circle around him, his voice was warm but measured, engaging without revealing too much. Natalie watched, from across the room, studying him like she would study a painting. There was something guarded in his expression, a careful distance he maintained even while smiling. She wondered what it cost him to be so constantly observed, so endlessly discussed. A careless moment. The champagne flowed freely, and Natalie found herself standing near a group of gallery owners she vaguely recognized. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversation drifting inevitably toward Julian Foster. "Such a waste," one woman said, her diamonds catching the light. "A man that gorgeous and that rich. Well, you know what they say," another added with a knowing look. "He probably prefers men. Why else would he avoid women so obviously?" Natalie felt the champagne loosening her usually careful tongue. Perhaps it was frustration at their casual cruelty, or perhaps it was exhaustion from years of struggling while people like them threw money at surface appearances. Whatever the reason, she spoke without thinking. "Maybe he just has standards," Natalie said, her voice carrying more than she intended. "Not everyone needs to parade their personal life for public approval." The group turned to stare at her. One woman raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "And you are?" Before Natalie could answer, a smooth voice spoke from behind her. "She makes an excellent point." Natalie's stomach dropped as she turned to find Julian Foster standing less than 2 feet away. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Had he heard everything? The slight tilt of his head suggested he had. "Mr. Foster," one of the gallery owners stammered, "we were just discussing your wonderful foundation work." "Of course you were," Julian said pleasantly, though his gaze never left Natalie's face. "Might I borrow this young woman for a moment? I believe we have things to discuss." The conversation that changed everything. Julian guided Natalie away from the group with a gentle hand at her elbow. They walked toward a quieter corner of the gallery, past a sculpture of twisted bronze that seemed to mirror the knots forming in Natalie's chest. "I apologize," Natalie began immediately. That was inappropriate of me to comment on something that is none of my business. Was it? Julian asked, stopping beside a large abstract painting. Or were you simply defending someone against casual gossip? I was defending the right to privacy, Natalie said carefully. Everyone deserves that, regardless of their wealth or status. Julian studied her for a long moment. Up close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the way his jaw tensed, slightly before he spoke. You're different from the usual crowd at these events. What's your name? Natalie Harper. I run a small gallery in Camden. Small galleries are often the most honest, Julian said. They show art because they love it, not because it matches the furniture. Despite her nervousness, Natalie smiled. That's exactly right, though matching the furniture does help pay rent. Honesty and humor, Julian observed. Rare combination. He paused, seeming to make a decision. I heard what you said earlier, about me probably preferring men. Natalie's face burned. Mr. Foster, I truly apologize. I had no right. You had every right to your opinion, he interrupted, just as I have every right to correct it. He stepped slightly closer, close enough that she could smell his subtle cologne, see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. His voice dropped to something almost intimate. I don't prefer men, Miss Harper. I simply prefer to keep my private life private. There's a difference. The air between them felt charged, electric. Natalie found herself unable to look away from his gaze, unable to form a coherent response. However, Julian continued, his tone shifting back to business. Your defense of privacy tells me something about your character. I like people who think before they judge, even if you didn't quite manage it tonight. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. My foundation is launching a program to support independent galleries. Based on tonight, I think. Yours might be exactly what we're looking for. Call my office Monday morning. Natalie took the card with trembling fingers. Are you serious? I never joke about art or second chances, Julian said. Then he smiled, a real smile that transformed his careful features into something genuinely warm. Though I do appreciate irony, you defended me while simultaneously insulting me. That takes a special kind of courage. Or stupidity, Natalie whispered. Often the same thing, Julian agreed. He extended his hand. I look forward to working with you, Miss Harper. Try not to mock any more millionaires before Monday. As Natalie shook his hand, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip, she realized that everything had just changed. What began as her worst moment of the evening had somehow become her greatest opportunity. And the man everyone whispered about had just proven himself far more complex than any rumor suggested. Julian walked away, rejoining the crowd with practiced ease. But twice before the evening ended, Natalie caught him glancing in her direction, and each time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Something that felt like the beginning of a story neither of them had planned to write. Monday morning arrived wrapped in fog, the kind that made London feel like a city suspended between dream and reality. Natalie stood outside the Foster Foundation headquarters, a sleek building of glass and steel that reflected the gray sky. She had changed outfits 3 times that morning, finally settling on a simple black blazer and cream blouse that she hoped struck the right balance between professional and creative. The reception area gleamed with modern art and polished marble. A young assistant named Claire greeted her with efficient warmth and led her through corridors lined with photographs of artists the foundation had supported. Each image told a story of transformation, of dreams given wings through Julian's resources. Julian's office occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Thames, and the space felt more like an art installation than a workplace. Sculptures stood in thoughtful corners, and paintings covered the walls in a careful arrangement that spoke of genuine appreciation rather than mere decoration. Miss Harper, Julian said, rising from behind a minimalist desk. He wore a charcoal suit today and somehow looked even more striking in the natural daylight. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for the opportunity," Natalie replied, setting her portfolio on the conference table he indicated. "I brought examples of our recent exhibitions." For the next hour, they discussed her gallery. Julian asked sharp questions about her: curatorial choices, her approach to supporting emerging artists, her vision for what art could accomplish in communities that felt overlooked by the mainstream art world. Natalie found herself speaking with a passion she usually kept hidden, explaining how art could heal, challenge, and transform when given the chance to reach people authentically. Julian listened with complete attention, occasionally making notes, in a leather journal. When she finished, he sat back and studied her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Your gallery loses money every quarter," he said bluntly. "Yes," Natalie admitted, "but it gains something more valuable. It gives artists a voice. Idealism doesn't pay rent." "No, but it pays in ways that matter more than money." Julian smiled slightly. "You realize you're talking to a millionaire about how money doesn't matter?" "I'm talking to someone who created a foundation instead of buying another yacht," Natalie countered. "So I think you understand exactly what I mean." Late nights and honest conversations, the partnership began simply. The Foster Foundation would provide funding for Natalie's gallery to expand its programming, host larger exhibitions, and reach more artists. In exchange, Natalie would curate a special showcase for the foundation's annual gala, featuring works that embodied the kind of raw, honest creativity that mainstream galleries often overlooked. What Natalie hadn't expected was how hands-on Julian would be. He didn't simply write checks and disappear. He visited the gallery regularly, often appearing late in the evening when Natalie was still working. He would study the paintings in silence, ask questions about the artist's techniques, and offer insights that revealed a deep understanding of artistic vision. One Thursday night, Natalie was hanging a new series of portraits when Julian arrived, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop around the corner. "You remembered I take it black," she said, surprised. "I pay attention," Julian replied, handing her the cup. He studied the portrait she had just hung, a striking image of a woman's face half in shadow. "This is powerful. Who's the artist?" "Thomas Chen. He's barely 23, works night shifts at a restaurant to afford paint. This series is about his mother's journey as an immigrant." Julian moved closer to the painting, his expression thoughtful. "The shadow work is remarkable. The way he uses darkness to reveal rather than conceal." "That's exactly what I thought," Natalie said, pleased that he understood. "Most people see darkness as absence, but Thomas sees it as presence, as truth." They stood side by side, studying the painting in comfortable silence. The gallery felt intimate at night, with only the track lighting illuminating the white walls and the city sounds muted beyond the windows. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said, carefully. "You want to know about the rumors," Julian said without looking at her. "I want to know why you let them persist. You're private, I understand that, but the speculation must be exhausting." Julian turned to face her, leaning against the wall. For a moment, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "When I was 26, I fell in love with someone. Her name was Catherine. She was brilliant, funny, and she saw me as just Julian, not the fortune or the family name." Natalie waited, sensing this was a story he rarely told. "We kept the relationship quiet because I wanted to protect what we had from public scrutiny. But someone from a tabloid found out, and suddenly our private life became entertainment. They followed us, photographed us, wrote stories that turned our love into gossip. Catherine couldn't handle the pressure. She left, and I don't blame her. The price of being with me was too high." "I'm sorry," Natalie said softly. "After that, I decided it was easier to let people speculate than to give them real information to destroy. If they're busy wondering about my sexuality, they're not digging into actual relationships." The rumors became armor. But armor is heavy, Natalie observed. You wear it all the time. Julian looked at her with something like surprise, as if she had articulated something he had never quite put into words. Yes, it is heavy. The exhibition takes shape. As weeks passed, Natalie and Julian fell into a rhythm of collaboration that felt natural, almost effortless. They would meet at the gallery several evenings each week, reviewing submissions from artists, debating the merits of different pieces, arguing passionately about arrangement and lighting. Natalie discovered that Julian had opinions about everything. He believed that art should provoke rather than comfort, that beauty could exist in darkness, that the most powerful works were often the most uncomfortable to view. She found herself both agreeing and challenging him, their debates stretching late into the night. One evening, as they arranged sculptures for the upcoming exhibition, Julian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. "Excuse me," he said, stepping outside to take the call. Through the gallery window, Natalie could see his posture shift, his shoulders tensing. When he returned, the careful mask he usually wore had slipped slightly. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Just another journalist wanting to ask invasive questions disguised as profile interest?" He set his phone down harder than necessary. "They want to know why I'm not married, whether I have someone special, if I'm lonely in my glass tower." "Are you?" Natalie asked quietly. "Lonely?" Julian met her eyes, and for a moment she saw past all his defenses. "Yes, but loneliness is safer than letting someone close enough to hurt you." "That's not living," Natalie said. "That's just surviving." "Sometimes survival is all you can manage." Natalie set down the sculpture she was holding and walked over to him. "Julian, I know what those people did to you was cruel, but not everyone is a journalist hunting for a story. Some people just want to know the person behind the armor. And what if the person behind the armor is disappointing? What if he's not?" The air between them shifted, charged with something neither had acknowledged until this moment. Julian's gaze dropped to her lips briefly before returning to her eyes. The gallery felt smaller suddenly, the distance between them both vast and non-existent. "Natalie," he said, his voice rough, "this is complicated. I know. My life is public in ways that aren't fair to anyone who gets close to me. I know that too. Then why are you looking at me like that?" "Like what?" "Like you see something worth the complication." Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. "Maybe I do." Julian reached out slowly, giving her time to step away. When she didn't, his hand came to rest against her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin with heartbreaking gentleness. "I haven't let anyone this close in 8 years. I'm terrified," Natalie admitted. "You're this powerful, complicated man, and I'm just someone trying to keep a small gallery alive. This doesn't make sense." "Nothing about this makes sense," Julian agreed. "But it's the first thing that's felt real in longer than I can remember." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. The moment stretched, fragile and perfect. Then his phone rang again, shattering the spell. Julian closed his eyes briefly, exhaling frustration. "I should answer that. It's my assistant. There might be an issue with the foundation gala venue." Natalie stepped back, her heart still racing. "Of course, handle your business." As Julian took the call, discussing logistics with professional efficiency, Natalie turned back to the sculptures. But her hands trembled slightly as she worked, and she knew everything had changed again. The line between professional and personal had blurred beyond recognition. When Julian finished the call, he stood watching her for a long moment. "Natalie, we should talk about this. About what's happening between us." "I know," she said, not turning around. "But not tonight. Tonight, let's just finish the exhibition. We can face complicated tomorrow." Julian nodded slowly. Tomorrow, then. But as they worked side by side through the rest of the evening, their hands occasionally brushing, their glances holding longer than necessary, both of them knew that tomorrow had already arrived. The question was whether they had the courage to embrace it, complications and all. The gallery lights cast their shadows against the white walls, two figures moving in careful synchrony, building something beautiful while trying to understand what they were building between themselves. Outside, London continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the small revolution happening in a Camden gallery, where a struggling curator and a guarded millionaire were, discovering that sometimes the most unexpected connections are the ones that matter most. The evening of the foundation. Gala arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of perfect autumn night that felt staged for important moments. Natalie stood in the exhibition space they had transformed over the past 2 months, surrounded by the work of 15 artists whose voices deserved to be heard. Track lighting illuminated canvases that spoke of struggle and hope, sculptures that twisted pain into beauty, installations that challenged every comfortable assumption about art and life. She wore a deep burgundy dress that Claire had helped her select, simple but elegant, with her dark hair swept into a soft style that made her feel both nervous and confident. Tonight would determine whether all their work had meaning, whether the vision she and Julian had fought for could survive contact with the wealthy donors who held the power to make or break careers. Julian arrived an hour before the guests, dressed in a midnight blue suit that made his gray eyes appear almost luminous. He walked through the exhibition slowly, stopping before each piece, and Natalie watched his face transform as he took in what they had created together. "It's perfect," he said finally, turning to her with genuine emotion in his voice. "You've given these artists something most galleries never provide: dignity, context, truth." "We did this together," Natalie reminded him. "Your resources made it possible." "My resources are just money," Julian said, moving closer. "You gave it soul." The past 2 months had been a careful dance between them. After that charged moment in her gallery, they had maintained professional boundaries, but the awareness hummed beneath every interaction. Natalie caught herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering the way his hand had felt against her cheek, the vulnerability in his eyes when he spoke of loneliness. When the world watches, the guests began arriving at 7. Within an hour, the space filled with London's cultural elite, champagne glasses catching the light, designer clothes creating a moving tapestry of wealth and influence. Natalie moved through the crowd, introducing artists to potential patrons, explaining the vision behind each piece, watching faces transform as they encountered art that demanded rather than decorated. Julian worked the room with practiced charm, but Natalie noticed how his eyes kept finding her across the space. Each time their gazes met, something passed between them that felt like a secret language only they understood. Thomas Chen, the young artist whose portraits had first impressed Julian, stood nervously beside his work as a prominent collector studied the paintings with serious attention. Natalie watched the conversation, saw the moment the collector nodded and began discussing acquisition, saw Thomas's face light with disbelieving joy. "You gave him that," Julian's voice said near her ear. "You saw his talent when no one else was looking." "That's what good curators do," Natalie said, turning to find Julian standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "We pay attention to what others overlook. Is that what you did with me?" Julian asked quietly. "Saw something others overlooked?" Before Natalie could answer, a woman's voice cut through the moment like broken glass. Julian Foster, hiding in the shadows as always. A blonde woman in a silver gown approached, her smile sharp enough to cut. Natalie recognized her from gossip columns. Victoria Ashford, a gallery owner known for both her influence and her cruelty. "Victoria," Julian said with cool politeness. "Thank you for coming." "I wouldn't miss your little charity project," Victoria said, her gaze sliding dismissively over the artwork. "Though I'm surprised you're championing such raw, unrefined work. I thought you had more sophisticated taste." "Sophistication isn't the same as authenticity," Natalie said before she could stop herself. Victoria's eyes fixed on her with predatory interest. And you are? Natalie Harper. I curated this exhibition. Ah, yes, the little gallery owner from Camden. Victoria's tone made it sound like an insult. I've heard Julian has taken quite an interest in your work. How fortunate for you. The implication hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Natalie felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Julian stepped between them. Natalie's gallery represents the kind of authentic artistic vision that commercial galleries like yours abandoned years ago, he said, his voice carrying an edge Natalie had never heard. If you came here to be cruel, you can leave. If you came to experience something real, I suggest you actually look at the art. Victoria's smile faltered. For a moment, something like genuine anger flickered across her perfect features. Careful, Julian. People are already talking about you and your new protégé. You wouldn't want to give them more fuel for speculation. Let them talk, Julian said flatly. I stopped caring about gossip when I realized the people spreading it had nothing better to do with their lives. Victoria's departure left a wake of uncomfortable silence. Several nearby guests had overheard the exchange, and Natalie could feel their curious stares like physical weight. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, I did, Julian replied. He took her hand, the gesture deliberate and public. Come with me. We need to talk. The truth in the quiet spaces. Julian led her through the crowd to a small office adjacent to the exhibition space, closing the door behind them. The noise of the gala became a distant murmur, and suddenly they were alone in a pool of quiet. I'm sorry, Julian said immediately. Victoria has always been vicious, but that was beneath even her usual standards. She implied that I'm only here because of a relationship with you, Natalie said, her voice tight. She made it sound like I slept my way into this opportunity. Anyone who knows your work knows that's absurd. But most people don't know my work, Julian. They know you, and after tonight, they'll assume exactly what Victoria suggested. Julian ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. This is what I was afraid of. This is why I keep people at a distance. Everything I touch becomes public property, subject to speculation and judgment. Then maybe you should have thought of that before holding my hand in front of half of London's art world, Natalie said, anger and hurt mixing in her chest. I held your hand because I'm tired of pretending, Julian said, his voice rising. I'm tired of letting cruel people dictate how I live my life. I'm tired of being alone because I'm afraid of what others will say. So I'm what? Your rebellion? Your way of proving something to people like Victoria? No, Julian said, stepping closer. You're the first person in 8 years who made me feel like maybe loneliness isn't safer. Maybe taking a risk is worth it. Natalie felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. You don't understand what it's like for me. You have money, power, influence. I have a struggling gallery and a reputation I've built through years of hard work. If people think I earned this opportunity through a relationship with you, it destroys everything I've accomplished. Then tell me what you want, Julian said, his voice breaking slightly. Do you want me to stay away? Pretend we're just business associates? I'll do it if that's what you need, but don't ask me to pretend I don't care about you. I've done enough pretending for one lifetime. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Natalie looked at this man who had everything the world valued but nothing it couldn't take away. She saw his loneliness clearly now, the weight of living behind armor, the cost of protecting himself from pain by refusing connection. I don't know what I want, she admitted. I'm terrified, Julian. This whole situation terrifies me. I know, he said softly. It terrifies me too. A choice made in courage. The office door opened suddenly. Claire appeared, apologetic but urgent. Mr. Foster, I'm sorry, but there's a situation. One of the major donors wants to speak with you immediately about funding 3 of the artists, and several journalists are asking for quotes about the exhibition. Julian looked at Natalie, a question in his eyes. Go, she said. This is what tonight is about. The artists need you out there. He hesitated, then nodded. We'll finish this conversation. I know. As Julian left, Natalie remained in the quiet office, trying to steady her breathing. Through the door, she could hear the sound of success, of conversations happening, of connections being made that would change artists' lives. This was what mattered. This was why they had worked so hard. She returned to the exhibition after repairing her composure, moving through the crowd with renewed focus. Thomas Chen found her with tears in his eyes, explaining that a collector had just purchased 3 paintings and commissioned a 4th. Another artist, an older woman who painted landscapes of places that no longer existed, was surrounded by admirers discussing her vision. Across the room, Julian spoke with donors and journalists, his public persona perfectly in place. But occasionally, his eyes would find Natalie, and in those glances, she saw everything he couldn't say aloud. The honest ending. The gala ended near midnight. Guests departed with catalogs and promises, artists left with hope they hadn't felt in years, and staff began the careful process of securing artwork and cleaning champagne glasses. Natalie coordinated the closing procedures with exhausted satisfaction, knowing they had succeeded beyond expectations. Julian approached as she was reviewing the final checklist with Claire. "Can I give you a ride home?" Natalie looked at him, this complicated man who had opened doors for her while simultaneously making her life more complex than she ever imagined. "All right." His car waited outside, sleek and expensive and somehow fitting. They drove through London in silence at first, the city lights painting patterns across the windshield. Finally, Julian spoke. "Catherine, the woman I told you about, she said something before she left. She said I had to choose between protecting myself and actually living, that I couldn't do both forever." "She was right," Natalie said quietly. "I know. But knowing something and doing something are different." He pulled the car to a stop outside her building but didn't turn off the engine. "Tonight, when Victoria implied those things about you, I realized I've been selfish. I've been thinking about what I want without fully considering what it costs you." "Julian, let me finish," he said. "You deserve someone who can be with you without complications, without gossip, without the weight of public scrutiny. Someone who won't put your reputation at risk just by caring about you." Natalie's heart sank. "Are you ending this before it even begins?" "I'm giving you the choice I should have offered from the start," Julian said, finally looking at her. His eyes held such sadness that it hurt to see. "If you want to keep this professional, I understand. I'll support your gallery, help your artists, and maintain appropriate distance. No one will question your success. And if I don't want that, then you need to know what you're choosing. There will be gossip. People will assume things. Your accomplishments will be attributed to our relationship rather than your talent. It won't be fair, and I can't protect you from it." Natalie sat in the expensive car, looking at this man who was offering her an exit, who cared enough to let her go rather than drag her into his complicated world. She thought about the past 2 months, the conversations that stretched into dawn, the way he looked at art like it mattered more than money, the vulnerability he showed only to her. "You're right," she said finally. "It won't be fair. People will talk. My reputation will be questioned. Everything will be more complicated." Julian nodded slowly, pain evident in his face. "But here's what you need to know," Natalie continued, reaching for his hand. "I didn't fall for Julian Foster, the millionaire. I fell for the man who brings coffee at midnight, who argues passionately about shadow work in paintings, who sees artists as people rather than investments. That man is worth the complication." "Natalie, I'm not saying this will be easy," she interrupted. "I'm not naive about what we're facing. But I've spent my whole life playing it safe, staying in my small corner, avoiding risks. Maybe it's time I took a chance on something that matters." Julian's fingers tightened around hers. "You're sure?" "No," she admitted with a small laugh. "I'm terrified. But I'm sure that I'd rather be terrified with you than safe and alone." He leaned across the console, his hand coming up to cup her face with that same gentle certainty she remembered. "I can't promise this will be easy." "I don't want easy," Natalie whispered. "I want real." When Julian kissed her, it felt like everything the past 2 months had been building toward. Gentle at first, then deeper, a conversation in a language beyond words. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Natalie saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," Julian said, smiling in a way she had never seen before, open and unguarded. "We stop hiding. We face whatever comes together. And we prove that sometimes the most unexpected love stories are the ones worth fighting for. Natalie kissed him again, feeling the rightness of it settle into her bones. Outside, London continued its ancient rhythm, indifferent to the small revolution happening in a parked car, where a struggling curator and a guarded millionaire had finally found the courage to choose connection over safety, love over armor, truth over the easier lie of distance. The future would bring challenges. There would be gossip, judgment, difficulties neither could foresee. But in this moment, they had each other, and that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful, complicated, and absolutely worth the risk. The end.